The Aurora Tower sat downtown like a jagged shard of dark glass piercing the sky. It was 50 stories of pure, unadulterated luxury, the kind of building where the ground floor lobby smelled of custom-blended cedar and expensive perfume, and the security guards looked like Secret Service agents. I walked into the lobby wearing a pair of faded Levi's, a plain gray oversized hoodie I'd bought on sale, and white Nike sneakers I'd owned for 2 years. My sister Caroline was already standing near the private elevator bank. She looked like a walking advertisement for quiet luxury, a cream-colored cashmere trench coat, a designer leather bag with no visible logos, and diamond studs that caught the minimalist lobby lighting. Beside her stood her husband, Bradley, a corporate defense attorney whose tailored charcoal suit practically screamed billable hours. "Oh, you actually showed up," Caroline said, her eyes dropping to my sneakers before snapping back up to my face. Her smile was tight, polite, and completely empty. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to get away from whatever it is you do these days." "It's Dad's 65th birthday celebration," I said, keeping my voice level. "He wanted a family dinner and he wanted to see your new place first. Of course I came." "Well, just try to keep up," she whispered, leaning in as the private elevator doors chimed and slid open. "This isn't like your usual neighborhood. Bradley had to pull 3 separate strings just to get us a private pre-market viewing of the penthouse suite. It's an $8 million property, Allison. The security here doesn't really tolerate people wandering around looking lost." "Understood," I said softly. I stepped into the elevator behind her, facing the mirrored walls. Caroline adjusted her coat while Bradley checked his gold watch with a practiced heavy sigh of a very busy, very important man. For the last 5 years, this was the version of me they knew. 5 years ago, I had walked away from a high-paying corporate consulting firm. I told the family I needed a break, that I was taking a low-level assistant job at a small, independent design studio downtown to find myself. To Caroline, it was the ultimate proof of her superiority. She had stayed on the corporate ladder, climbing to vice president of an international logistics firm. She bought the suburban mansion, married the partner at the law firm, and took over the role of the family's crown jewel. I became the quiet underachiever, the sister they invited to events out of obligation but sat at the end of the table so I wouldn't embarrass them in front of their wealthy friends. What I hadn't told Caroline, or my parents, or anyone else in my family, was that the small design studio wasn't just a place where I made copies. I owned it. And over those 5 years, that studio had quietly expanded into a multi-million-dollar private real estate development fund. The elevator didn't just go up, it soared. My ears popped at the 35th floor. When the doors finally opened on the 50th, the layout took my breath away, even though I had already memorized the blueprints 2 years ago. The penthouse was a massive open-concept masterpiece. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire perimeter, offering a staggering, unobstructed 360-degree view of the city skyline. The floors were a rare polished gray marble, reflecting the setting sun like a sheet of ice. My parents were already there, standing near a long, minimalist marble kitchen island where a private catering staff was setting up champagne flutes. "Allison, darling, you made it," my mother said, stepping forward to press her cheek against mine. Her hug was brief, her hands instantly smoothing down her own silk blouse. "We were starting to worry. The traffic downtown is dreadful for people who don't live in the center." "Traffic was fine, Mom. Happy birthday, Dad," I said, walking over to give my father a brief hug. He was holding a glass of 20-year-old scotch, looking out over the terrace. "It's quite a view, isn't it?" Dad said, gesturing toward the windows. He looked at Bradley and Caroline with immense pride. "Never thought I'd see the day one of my kids was buying a piece of the sky." "Only the best for family, Dad," Bradley said, casually swirling his drink. "The Aurora is the hottest ticket in the city right now. Getting a unit here is nearly impossible. The developer is notoriously reclusive. They only sell to vetted high-net-worth individuals." "Well, Bradley's firm handles some of their secondary corporate restructuring," Caroline chimed in, her voice ringing out across the empty marble room. She looked over at me with a sweet, condescending tilt of her head. So we got priority. Speaking of which, Allison, the catering staff is charging per head for the champagne toast. I asked them to just bring you a mineral water. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable drinking something that costs more than your weekly groceries. The catering server paused, a bottle of vintage Cristal in his hand, looking between us with visible awkwardness. The champagne is fine, I told the server, keeping my eyes fixed on my sister. Pour a full glass, please. Caroline's smile stiffened, the corner of her jaw twitching. Suit yourself, Ellie, just don't get used to the taste. The server poured the champagne, its crisp golden bubbles catching the reflection of the setting sun through the massive glass walls. Bradley raised his glass, looking around the pristine, empty room with the air of a man who already owned it. To Dad, Bradley announced loudly, 65 years of hard work, and to the family that reaps the rewards. We are incredibly proud to have you here tonight to witness the next chapter of our legacy. Glasses clinked. The Cristal was exceptional, but as I swallowed, Caroline leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. I hope you're not planning on staying late, Allison. Once the real estate director arrives with the final paperwork, things are going to get highly technical. Lots of corporate jargon, asset verification, legal jargon. It'll probably just bore you. I think I can manage to follow along, I said, setting my glass on the marble island. Right, Caroline scoffed softly, swirling her champagne. Like you followed along at your little design firm? Mom told me you're still just managing the archiving department there, scanning blueprints all day. It's cute, really. No pressure, no real responsibilities. But let's be honest, it doesn't exactly prepare you for an $8 million closing. Before I could answer, the heavy double doors of the penthouse opened. A woman in a sharp navy Hugo Boss suit walked in, holding a sleek leather document portfolio. This was Eleanor Vance, the senior managing director for Aurora's residential sales. I knew her well. Her team had been sending me weekly progress reports on the building's construction for the last 18 months. Bradley immediately straightened his tie and stepped forward, putting on his best courtroom smile. Eleanor, fantastic to see you again, Bradley said, extending his hand. Thank you for accommodating the private viewing. My in-laws were dying to see the place before we finalized everything. Eleanor gave a polite, professional nod, shaking his hand briefly. Of course, Mr. Thompson. The penthouse is fully prepped for the signing. However, as I mentioned on the phone, the final approval doesn't just rest with my office. The principal investor of the Bennett Group insists on reviewing all top-tier residential contracts personally. Oh, that's completely fine, Caroline interjected, stepping up beside her husband. Bradley's firm has pristine credentials, our liquid assets are already verified, and the wire transfer is authorized. There shouldn't be a single issue from the developer's side. We shall see, Eleanor said, walking over to the marble island and unzipping her portfolio. She laid out 3 copies of the thick, heavy stock paper contract. If you and Mr. Thompson could review the final terms on page 14, we can begin the initialing process while we wait for the final sign-off. My parents crowded around the island, looking over Caroline's shoulder with pure admiration. My mother practically beamed, her hand resting on Caroline's cashmere-clad shoulder. Look at this, Charles, Mom whispered to Dad. An actual penthouse in the Aurora. I always knew Caroline would be the one to put our family name on something iconic. Some children just have that drive. Dad nodded, taking a slow sip of his scotch. Ambition, Sarah. That's what it takes. You can't build a life like this by playing it safe and hiding in the background. Caroline looked back at me over her shoulder, her eyes gleaming with absolute triumph. You can come closer and look if you want, Allie. It's probably the only time you'll ever see a contract with this many zeros on it. I didn't move from my spot. I just took another slow sip of my champagne, looking out at the city skyline as it began to light up in the twilight. Actually, Caroline, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet chatter of the room, you might want to hold off on signing that. The room went dead silent. Bradley paused, his expensive pen hovering just millimeters above the signature line. Caroline turned around slowly, her expression instantly hardening from sweet condescension to pure irritation. Excuse me? Allison, what did I tell you about embarrassing me tonight? Just because you can't afford a life like this doesn't mean you get to ruin it for the rest of us. I'm not ruining anything, I replied calmly, walking over to the edge of the marble island. I'm just advising your husband not to sign a document that has an automatic denial clause built into Section 9. Bradley let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Section 9? Allison, you scan papers for a living. I am a senior partner at a corporate defense firm. I wrote my first multi-million-dollar merger before you even knew what an escrow account was. Don't lecture me on legal clauses. Section 9, I repeated, looking directly at Eleanor Vance, whose eyes had suddenly gone incredibly wide, explicitly states that the Bennett Hospitality Group reserves the right to void any residential contract if the buyer's source of funds involves secondary corporate debt restructuring under review. And Bradley, your firm's secondary restructuring account, it was flagged for internal audit at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Bradley's laugh cut off instantly. His face went entirely pale. How the hell do you know about that audit? Before he could process the question, the doors to the penthouse opened again. This time it wasn't a server or a real estate agent. It was Marcus Vance, the chief executive officer of the entire development corporation, flanked by 2 security directors. Caroline and Bradley immediately turned toward him, but Marcus didn't even look at them. He walked straight past the gorgeous view, straight past my parents, and stopped directly in front of my Target dress and 2-year-old sneakers. He stopped, straightened his jacket, and gave a deep, respectful bow. "Miss Bennett," Marcus said, his voice echoing off the pristine marble walls. "The board has received your brief. The entire building is secured, and the final accounts are ready for your signature. We were just waiting for you to finish your family dinner before we processed the eviction of the current contract." The silence that blanketed the room was suffocating. The gentle clinking of catering silver had completely stopped, and even the city outside seemed to freeze behind the glass. Caroline's eyes darted frantically from Marcus Vance to me, then back to Marcus. Her mouth opened, but only a small, breathless sound came out. "Mr. Vance," Bradley finally stammered, stepping forward, his confident lawyer persona cracking at the seams. "I think there's been a massive misunderstanding. You just addressed my sister-in-law as Miss Bennett, the Bennett Group. That's just a coincidence, right? She's an archivist. She works at a small local design studio." Marcus turned his head slowly, looking at Bradley with cold, aristocratic confusion. "A small studio? You mean Bennett Architectural and Design, the firm that drafted the entire blueprint for this tower? Miss Allison Bennett doesn't just work there, Mr. Thompson. She founded it. And the Bennett Capital Group, which financed 70% of this skyscraper's construction. That is her private holding fund." "What?" my mother whispered, her glass of crystal trembling so violently that champagne spilled over her manicured fingers. She looked at me as if looking at a stranger who had just broken into her house. "Allison, what is he talking about?" Before I could answer, Bradley's pocket began to buzz. Then it buzzed again and again, a relentless, aggressive vibration. He pulled out his phone, his thumb shaking as he unlocked the screen. Dozens of urgent notifications from his law firm's senior partners were flooding his screen. "Holy shit," Bradley muttered, his voice cracking as he stumbled backward against the marble island. "The audit, it's real. The secondary restructuring account was frozen 10 minutes ago. Our liquid assets for the wire transfer, they're locked." Caroline grabbed his arm, her designer bag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the marble floor with a heavy thud. "Bradley? What do you mean locked? Sign the contract. Use the backup account." "There is no backup account, Caroline," Bradley snapped, his face flushed a dangerous shade of red. "The audit covers the entire partner pool. We can't move a single dollar." Eleanor Vance calmly stepped forward, pulled the 3 thick copies of the $8 million contract away from Bradley, and slid them back into her leather portfolio. "In that case, Mr. Thompson, under Section 9, your application for residency at the Aurora Tower is officially denied for failure of asset verification." Caroline looked like she had been slapped. She turned on me, her tears finally spilling over, mixing anger with deep, suffocating humiliation. "You did this," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You knew we were buying this place. You let us come here. You let us celebrate. You let me look like an idiot just to humiliate me. Why didn't you say anything over all these years?" I set my glass down on the counter with a quiet, deliberate click. I walked past Marcus, past my stunned parents, and stood right in front of my sister. "Because you never listened, Caroline," I said softly, my voice calm and completely devoid of anger. "2 years ago, when I bought the land for this tower, I called Mom and Dad to invite you all to dinner to celebrate. You took the phone and spent 20 minutes bragging about your promotion to vice president, then told me you were too busy for little local dinners. Every time I tried to share my life, you minimized it to make yourself feel bigger. You needed me to be the underachiever in the target dress so you could feel like the golden child." Caroline opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. She looked down at my old sneakers, then up at the CEO of the city's largest development company standing behind me like a bodyguard. The reality of the shift in power was absolute. My father cleared his throat, his face a mask of profound shock and sudden, desperate regret. "Allison, 15 million in annual revenue, the entire Bennett Group. We had no idea. We were just worried about you. We thought you were struggling." "No, Dad," I said, turning to look him in the eyes. "You weren't worried. You were just comfortable ignoring me. But tonight you wanted to see a name on something iconic. Well, look at the front of the building when you leave." I turned back to Eleanor. "Draft a new residential lease for the penthouse under my private name. And as for my sister..." I glanced at Caroline's pale, tear-streaked face. "Tell the management to offer them a 10% discount on a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor if their audit clears. Consider it my birthday gift to the family." Caroline let out a strangled sob and turned toward the elevator, dragging Bradley by the arm. My parents stood frozen for a few seconds, looking at me with a mixture of intense pride and deep shame before quietly following them out. The doors chimed and closed, leaving the room entirely empty except for Marcus, Eleanor, and me. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass, looking out over the glittering diamonds of the city skyline. My phone buzzed in my hoodie pocket, the first wave of texts from my family, full of apologies, explanations, and sudden invitations to lunch. I smiled, muted the phone, and slipped it back into my pocket. Tomorrow morning I'd go into my design studio, pour myself a regular coffee, and sketch. I would live my life exactly how I wanted, on my own terms. But tonight the silence I had built my empire on had finally spoken, and it was deafening.